I think the complexities of this case were quite unique. There were so many unknowns. It showed how cold and callous people could be.
I didn't really know what to think. I was 14 at the time. It just all seemed a bit weird to me. Something you would see like on TV. Like it's not something that actually happens to like you and your family.
Whenever you put things together, you can just see it unraveling. He had made his mind up.
These two relationships that she was having with these two men were both fiery relationships.
You can see the wheelie bin caught up in the branches. This is so unusual. This has to be connected.
There was so many poignant moments where things could have ended so differently for Pat.
I was just wanting to know why he actually did it. I'm Morgan McCormick and I'm 19 and I'm from Newton Arts. I was really close to my dad growing up. When I went to work, I would try and pull sickies to go with him so I could just sit in like the wee creche area and play with all the wee toys and stuff. Growing up, I just was always clung to my dad. I was always daddy's little girl and he always called me Flossie. It's just like a father-daughter bond. It was always just me and him. My dad has always picked me up to bring me to school. I got up around 7, got in the shower, just straightened my hair, and then put my uniform on, put my blazer on, doing my tie. He would normally come around like 8-ish. He didn't show up for ages. And we were just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then it just got to a point where I was like, oh, he's not here. So then my mum had to take me to school and I was a wee bit late. And I was telling my friends, like, it's really weird, my dad's not replying. My friends were all like, oh, that's not like him.
Hello, I'd like to report a missing person, please.
It was initially reported on Saturday, the 1st of June, and it was a work colleague of Mr. McCormick who had reported him missing. My name is Heather Campbell. I'm a Detective Chief Inspector in the PSNI. I was in a team of specialist investigators who primarily investigate any major incident or major crime. It was actually William McCormick, but he was known by everyone really as Pat McCormick. He was 55 years old in 2019. A father to 4 children. He worked as a care worker. And he also had a part-time job as a caretaker in one of the local churches. For the past while, he had been living back home at his parents' address in Saintfield. The local CID detectives were treating it as a missing person investigation and were carrying out all of the normal activities. You go and speak to the last person he was with, the last people he'd spoken to, his friends, his immediate family. The concern that police had escalated quite quickly. Mr. McCormick had just disappeared, hadn't made any contact with anyone, which is very unusual. He hadn't used any form of social media, he hadn't used any banking that was linked to him. Hadn't been reported as being involved in any incident, he wasn't in a hospital. And the people that were closest to him simply did not know where he was. It was highly unusual that he hadn't picked up his daughter from school on the Friday. He would do this every day. He would take her to school and collect her. Without any warning or notice, that just did not happen on the Friday.
I came home to the police being there after I got home from school and everything, just to talk to us and tell us he's filed as a missing person and stuff, and they were looking for him and trying to find his car and everything because they couldn't find his car at first. I didn't really believe any of it. I was 14 at the time, so I was just like holding on to all the hope I could. So I just thought of it as, oh, he's just being silly, like something, like he's not actually missing sort of thing. Something you would see like on TV. Like it's not something that actually happens to like you and your family. I was like, he's around somewhere, like they will find him eventually.
Heather began her investigation by building a timeline of Pat's final movements.
It became clear that Mr. McCormick had last been seen on Thursday, the 30th of May, 2019. That was when he was at home at his parents' address in Saintfield. At around 5 to 9 in the evening, he had received a phone call. His family would report that it was a short phone call. I think it just lasted just over 2 minutes. From what they could hear, it sounded like the female was making the call was maybe upset or distressed.
Pat had recently separated from his wife following a relationship with another woman, Leslie Ann Dodds.
My dad cheated on my mum. He obviously moved out of the house and started living with my granny. So I knew of Leslie Ann. I met her a couple times before I knew any of that.
Pat's mother overheard his call. She believed he was speaking to Leslie Ann, who lived 8 miles away in Comber.
After that very short phone call, Mr. McCormick had made the decision to travel to Comber. Leslie Ann Dodds was 20 years old. She had met Pat through work. They worked together as care assistants. And during that time, a relationship had developed between them. It seemed like the relationship had been going on for a number of months. The exact sort of reasons why that relationship started wasn't necessarily clear to police. There was a significant age gap between Pat and Leslie Ann.
Heather knew that Leslie Ann was potentially the last person to see Pat, and they had to talk to her.
She actually reported that she hadn't seen him since Tuesday, the 28th of May, and had not been in contact with him, which was probably the first point where police started to think there's something not quite right here in terms of what we're being told.
This conflicted with Pat's mother's account of the pair talking the night he disappeared.
We were starting to get information from phone data, from witnesses, from colleagues and friends, which clearly, a lot of people knew they were in a relationship, and there would have been daily contacts between Leslie Ann Dodds and Pat, certainly up until the Thursday when he went missing. We also were keen to then check Leslie Ann Dodds' address in Comber because we believed that that was the location that he was travelling to on the Thursday night. That was met with some suspicious resistance. She just didn't understand why police would want to check there for him, and she certainly wasn't willing to come to meet police to let us do so. And again, that was a bit of a red warning flag to police that something's not quite. This isn't how a normal girlfriend or friend or partner would react to someone that was missing.
My name's Jennifer Ray, and I'm a detective inspector in the PSNI. Leslie Ann wouldn't come over to allow them into the flat. Her mother had told the police that Leslie Ann Dodds didn't want to, in case she got arrested. Her mother had said that she would give permission for them to force entry. So a period of time later, the local police and team officers then had to force their way into Leslie Ann Dodds' house because they had no other means of accessing the property at that stage.
It was a second-floor flat in a multi-occupied building, and it was right on Castle Street, right in the heart of Comber, on one of the main busy roads through the town.
There was a very strong smell of bleach in the communal hallway as they entered the building. Whenever they went up to Leslie Ann's flat, there was no sign of a disturbance and nothing really that would suggest that anything had happened and that Pat wasn't actually in that house at that stage.
It was unheated. There was no electricity, so it was quite clear that no one had been living there, perhaps for weeks before that.
Leslie Ann's behaviour wasn't that of a concerned girlfriend, and detectives soon discovered a reason why. There was another man in Leslie Ann Dodd's life.
David Gill was Leslie Ann Dodd's fiancé. I think they'd been together 4 or 5 years before this happened. I don't know how long that the affair was going on, but there were suggestions from Pat McCormick's wife that this had been going on from round about Christmas, so maybe 5 months. It seemed to have been quite a tempestuous relationship, as was Leslie Ann's relationship with David Gill.
David is 26 years old. He was unemployed and lived just outside Cumber by himself on a family farm building there. The next piece of information that police became aware of was that Mr. McCormick had actually contacted police on that Thursday evening when he travelled to Cumber.
Police Service of Northern Ireland, can I take your name, please?
It's William McCormick.
Okay, and how may I help you?
I'll tell you what it is. I'm going to sound silly here, but I'll tell you what it is. My girlfriend called down to see me here in Cumber, but I was down earlier and I seen her ex-boyfriend's van hiding in a, scared of him, maybe waiting on me, coming out of her flat to give me a beating, if you know what I mean. And just wondering, getting police standing there waiting for me because he's a bad boy, so he is, you know.
Right.
He's definitely hiding somewhere, like. I'm just a bit concerned.
It's quite unusual to have a direct contact with police immediately before someone goes missing. So this was really critical to our investigation and a real key piece of evidence.
He's threatened me before, so he has.
He has hit you?
He's threatened to do me in, yeah.
He threatened to do you in, and did you report that at the time?
No, I didn't, because I didn't want any hassle, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just go down there and check out the van still there, so, well, I just need to be very careful, so I do, that's all. But he's a big brute sort of a fella.
You ring me back if there is any danger at all, or if he is with the van, or he threatened you in any way.
I'll ring you back if there's any danger, so, well, thanks very much. Okay, thanks very much anyway.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you, bye-bye, bye-bye.
This conversation gave us a really good insight in terms of just how Pat was feeling that evening, what prompted him to phone police, what was going through his mind, what thoughts he was having, and also a bit of a background in terms of potentially who this other boyfriend was. It's obviously very relevant to a missing person investigation whenever it's uncovered that there is a fear on behalf of the victim, and also in terms of potentially threats that have been made previously. So it was very vital that we tried to garner anyone that would have any kind of threat or hostility towards Pat at this point. We didn't have strong evidence to support that he had come to harm. Obviously, it was a hypothesis being followed, but there absolutely was evidence that he had come to Leslie Ann Dodd's apartment potentially to meet David Gill there, or certainly that he was present there, and that there was involvement of Leslie Ann Dodds. So the decision was made that both David Gill and Leslie Ann Dodds would be arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. This then allowed us to bring them into police custody, to carry out whatever searches we needed to post-arrest, and also to get their formal account in terms of what had actually happened.
Just 3 days after Pat's disappearance, detectives made a decisive move.
Police then attended David Gill's home address, where they located Leslie Ann Dodds and David Gill in the early hours of the morning on the 3rd of June. And they were both arrested and brought to the police station.
Pat McCormick was last seen here in Cumber on Thursday evening. A 26-year-old man and a 20-year-old woman were both arrested on suspicion of kidnapping.
Heather knew they couldn't hold the pair for long, and every hour that passed left detectives more concerned for Pat's welfare.
Usually the information would be growing in terms of intelligence as to why he had been kidnapped or abducted or taken, where he may have gone, what the motive behind it would have been. But this was quite an unusual case because there wasn't any of that. Mr. McCormick had just disappeared. There hadn't been any demand or menaces for money or anything associated with the kidnapping.
Pat was now missing for more than 72 hours. Time wasn't on their side, and detectives were increasingly worried Pat may have come to harm.
The team were working flat out, speaking to witnesses, gathering CCTV, and there was still a lot of early information, which was really helpful for the investigative team. I think we had in excess of over 80 different sites of CCTV that we were interested in and around Comber. There's also, I think, in excess of 170 witnesses identified in those early days, so there was a lot of people to talk to.
Heather was hoping CCTV would allow her to piece together the movements of both Pat and David Gill the night Pat disappeared.
CCTV was viewed in and around the area of Castle Street in Comber.
Behind me is the building where Leslie Ann's flat is located, and also Castle Street. And we know that David Gill had parked his transit van a little bit away from the flat, then walked up Castle Street, in through the archway and into the property. We know Pat drove up and then left the area. He returned. He parked just off to my right here on High Street. And then we see him on CCTV crossing Castle Street in through the same archway, and that is the last sighting of Pat McCormick alive. 43 minutes later, we see David Gill exiting the same location and walking away from this scene.
Heather and Jennifer suspected that there was an altercation between the two men while they were in the flat, but they had no proof and hoped technology could provide some.
Quite often, phones would be seized as part of an arrest and give an insight in terms of relationships and connections with people. Phone data is really important to any major crime investigation. It obviously provides both geographic location, but it also provides a picture as to not just how people were moving, but how they were interacting, what phone calls were made, what phone calls weren't answered, what attempts were made to phone people.
The investigation turned to cell site analysis to build a timeline of movements of both the suspects and Pat that night.
Cell site analysis is the way in which we are able to locate the general area of a mobile phone from the phone records that it's created historically. Then, depending on the case, we would use radio frequency surveying for the finite detail as to whether that cell provided coverage a specific location or not. My name is Paul Hope, and I'm a cell site analysis and radio frequency surveying expert.
Paul can use the data from mobile phone cell sites to establish the location of a particular mobile phone.
When you look at the call data, it appeared as if Dodd's phone had been phoning the victim shortly after 9:30.
This was the phone call heard by Pat's mother. But it wasn't the only communication between Pat and Leslie Ann that night.
This is a detailed log of all the communications on the night in question between Leslie Ann Dodds, Pat McCormick and David Gill. The call logs show both the phone messages and phone calls between Leslie Ann Dodds and Pat McCormick. So this is obviously in direct contradiction to the account that Leslie Ann Dodds first gave to police and then continued to give to police. We were aware of these inconsistencies, and we believe that Leslie Ann Dodds was withholding the truth, potentially lying. And again, this was a real flag and warning sign for us as investigators. So we can see from these call logs that we know on that evening she was in phone contact with Pat, but she also critically was in contact with David Gill, and that shows a level of orchestration and really Leslie Ann's involvement.
As the night wore on, the messages to Pat became more persuasive.
At 21 minutes past 9 on the 30th of May, and it stated, "I've left him on way to mine, do you want to stay at mine?" Pat then replies to Leslie Ann Dodds 4 minutes later saying, "Hi, you told me you wanted nothing to do with me. I think you're trying to set me up to get a kicking, are you?" And Leslie Ann Dodds sends a further message to Pat to inform him that "I've left him for you. Please come and stay at mine. You wanted me to make a choice, so I've left him for you." So again, this clearly plays into there's a third party at play here, and also again potentially some kind of motive in terms of what has then happened and why Pat has simply disappeared. Over the next sort of 10 minutes or so shows a lot of back and forth between Leslie Ann Dodds and Pat McCormick, and it's very clear that Pat's very unsure as to what Leslie Ann's trying to do.
Pat then, after 9:30, texts, "Hi, I am on my way."
While Pat was on the move, so too were the phones belonging to Leslie Ann and David Gill.
Around 21:30 on the night, Gill's and Dodd's phones, not necessarily users, have stopped using cells that provide coverage at Gill's home address and have moved together, mirrored movement, to cells that provide coverage here at Dodd's address. Gill's phone detached from the network and was potentially turned off. Didn't come back on again until just before midnight, by which time he was back at his home address at Ballyglicorn Road. I'm saying he turned his phone off. There are numerous reasons why a phone can detach from the network. It can be battery failure, but you need to look at how often does this target phone turn off. In this case, it was unusual.
While both David Gill and Leslie Ann Dodd's phone were in Comber, only David Gill was seen on CCTV, driving his blue transit van.
The CCTV showed David Gill arriving in Comber and entering Leslie Ann Dodd's flat. And we knew from phone data that both David Gill and Leslie Ann's phones were believed to be at that location, which obviously prompted the question, why was Leslie Ann Dodds not seen on the CCTV footage with David Gill? Leslie Ann Dodds was clearly elsewhere, and potentially her phone was not with her or on her person.
David Gill had taken Leslie Ann's phone with him to Comber. Detectives believe she remained at Gill's house, from where she was able to keep in touch with Pat using a laptop and a landline.
Pat McCormick had sent a message to Leslie Ann Dodds at 10:06, saying simply, "Hi, ring me." So at this point, it's quite clear that Pat is obviously very anxious and worried and wants direct conversation by way of a live phone call with Leslie Ann, and he's not getting that. Someone did not want to reply by way of a phone call. A matter of minutes later, Pat again texts Leslie Ann saying, "I want to talk to you on the phone first. If you don't, I'm not coming up." So that then results in quite an angry reply. Pat then replies to that message saying, "Hi, no problem, that suits me." Pat then phones his mum to say, "Look, I'm on my way back home, don't wait up for me, leave out a key," and gives every indication that he's going to leave Comber and travel home and spend the night there.
At this point, he made the 101 call saying he was concerned David Gill may be laying in wait.
Well, what is it you want the police to do?
I want them to stand in the road till I go upstairs. All I want is to get in through the door upstairs into your flat. That's all I want. It'll only be a few minutes.
However, while he was talking to police, someone was trying to call him from a landline with a withheld number.
The next sequence of communications are very interesting. So there's a number of phone calls from David Gill's landline, which was withheld. At the same time, there's a number of messages from Leslie Ann Dodds' mobile to Pat, and they were trying to tell Pat that it was Leslie Ann trying to phone him from a withheld number.
Detectives believe the two suspects were attempting to deceive Pat into believing Leslie Ann was at the flat, so that he would call to the property. Their plan worked.
Pat sent a text message saying, "I'm coming into Comber in 2 minutes."
Less than 5 minutes later, Pat's then seen on CCTV entering through the archway in Comber towards Leslie Ann Dodds' apartment. 43 minutes later, David Gill is seen exiting through that same archway, and there is no sign of Pat.
Less than a day after arresting Leslie Ann Dodds and David Gill, this new evidence convinced Heather and Jennifer that Pat had been lured to the flat and then killed. A missing person inquiry now became a murder investigation, with one very unusual feature.
I had never been involved in a murder case where we didn't have the body of the deceased. It is quite a different investigation because there's two real tracks to it. Recovering the body of Mr. McCormick, partly for evidential value and to prove the case of the murder. But also, at the heart of this, you have a family who still have their loved one, their father, their son missing, and they want to know what has happened to him.
There are cases where There have been convictions for murder where no body has ever been recovered. It is more challenging, but it isn't impossible.
We further arrested both Leslie Ann Dodds and David Gill on suspicion of murder, and it was declared as a no-body murder investigation at that point.
On Monday, a man and woman, both in their 20s, were arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. Last night, the PSNI said they'd been rearrested on suspicion of murder. The police also said they'd been granted an additional 36 hours to question the man and woman. Although no body has been found, police now believe Pat McCormick has been murdered.
I came home to the police being there, and they said, like, we need to talk to the whole family, so we had to wait for everyone to come home from work and stuff. So everyone got home, we were all sitting in the sunroom, and our two family liaisons, the girl, she turned around and she told us that it was being turned into a murder investigation. My older brother, Mackenzie, he was very hopeful and he didn't believe it. We all had so much tension around us and it didn't feel nice. My mum was on the edge because she had kids to look after. But if it's being turned into a murder investigation, she was going to have to grieve him while looking after 4 kids as well.
Still in police custody, detectives began to question David Gill and Leslie Ann. Not about kidnapping this time, but murder.
They both had denied any involvement in the disappearance of Pat, and Leslie Ann had in fact gone further and said she hadn't been in contact with him, which we knew was untrue.
Leslie Ann Dodds had provided the account that she had known Pat for approximately 8 months at that stage. She met him through her employment. She said they weren't in a relationship, and that she didn't realise that he was missing until Pat's mother had contacted her on the Friday morning.
We could see that there was inconsistencies in both their accounts, which again, was highly suspicious. In interview, David Gill initially stated that he had had no contact with Pat McCormick and that he didn't believe that there was a relationship between Pat and Leslie Ann Dodds. He then, after further questioning, changed that position and said he maybe was aware of it, but he didn't believe there was a relationship and that he'd actually had a conversation or certainly a discussion with Leslie Ann Dodds around the fact that there may have been a relationship, but that was all now resolved.
Further inquiries revealed more details of this unusual love triangle.
These 2 relationships that she was having with these 2 men, judging by text messages that were exchanged, they were both fiery relationships. David Gill had only become aware that his fiancée, Leslie Ann Dodds, had been having an affair with Pat, I think a couple of days before. He also contacted Pat McCormick's wife to let her know about the affair, and she was able to tell them that she also knew. So it would appear that David was one of the last people to know in that small circle that his fiancée was, in fact, having an affair with Pat McCormick.
None of this necessarily helps you to prove the murder and the killing of Pat McCormick. We didn't have Pat's body still. We didn't know exactly how he died. That was our strongest hypothesis. But at that point, we weren't quite there. And so we got to the point of the day where we actually released Leslie Ann Dodds and David Gill on bail, which wouldn't be unusual, and that's to allow us to conduct those further inquiries, because you can't hold, suspects in custody for endless periods of time.
Police had a motive, jealousy, but they needed hard evidence and decided to track the movements of David Gill and his blue transit van after he had left the flat the night Pat went missing.
There was a lot of really significant developments, both on witness inquiries and in CCTV, which my team of detectives gathered. We became aware of very significant movements of David Gill the day after, in the early hours of the Friday morning. So we knew that he had travelled from his home address back into Cumber Town Centre before 7 a.m. on a Friday morning. David Gill had taken a route through the town. He then parked his transit van as close as he could to the premises here. and then had used the back entrance through the ground level. This wasn't an area that was particularly busy at that time of the morning, so it gave him some cover from members of the public or other witnesses potentially seeing what he was doing. We had witnesses reporting that a fairly heavy-set male was cleaning up around the apartment area, carrying out bags of rubbish to a blue Ford Transit van, which was parked right behind the flat. He said that he'd gone in to clear up a bit, which didn't really make sense to police, but that was what he was telling us. After he then drove straight up High Street through the junction here, out towards, there's a little primary school along that road, took a left and then headed out towards Ballygowan.
Heather and the major investigation team needed to discover what David Gill had been cleaning up.
Critical to this was the forensic examination of Leslie Ann Dodd's flat. Police had entered it on the Sunday when he went missing and hadn't overtly seen any signs of, you know, that a murder had occurred or that it was a crime scene. At that point, we go back and go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. We bring our specialists with us. You'd be looking at anything that potentially would be able to prove that something had occurred there that resulted in the injury or the death or the harm to Pat McCormick, and even that put either our suspects or Pat McCormick present at that location at that time. That was slightly more difficult because we knew the flat belonged to Leslie Ann Dodd. We knew she was in a long-term relationship with David Gill. His DNA would be there, his fingerprints would be there. Pat McCormick was also in a relationship. So his DNA and his fingerprints and footwear, they could be easily explained.
While the presence of DNA belonging to either David Gill or Pat McCormick might not have been suspicious, David Gill's behaviour definitely was.
So part of our witness inquiries that we had conducted, somebody had seen David Gill cleaning up in the communal stairway. Police officers had noted a strong smell of bleach. Witness inquiries had also revealed that David Gill had brought down some black bags. So we carried out investigations in relation to the communal stairway as well, and there was brown substance found on the stairs.
The substance was sampled and sent for testing. The search also uncovered a distinctive item: Pat McCormick's tobacco box.
It's like a wee tin box, and it was blue, and it had like a wee design on it, and there were just to keep cigarettes in it, because he would have rolled. So I had to like identify that box, and I had to write a statement about it, because obviously that was his. I knew what his box was, because I would have put his cigarettes in for him whenever he would like hand me them. I put them back in the box for him and stuff.
Crucially for police, Morgan had reported that she'd seen Pat with the tin the day he went missing after dropping her off at school.
That tin was located within Leslie Ann Dodd's flat. When it was tested, it tested for Pat McCormick's DNA. So we knew that he had been in that flat later on the 30th of May.
But a tobacco tin was no replacement for finding Pat himself. Heather and Jennifer needed to continue the search and called on a specialist team.
I'm Colin Ferguson. During the case, I was the team leader for the search and rescue team and the dive team. We basically access areas that ordinary police can't get into. So that can be at height using ropes or various platforms. We can work in water. Our main role was in the mountains and sort of wilderness areas. So for doing recoveries in those sort of areas whereby it's just more technical and a lot more skill is required. We were called in initially to search some of the roofs of the buildings in the general area.
All of the search activity was centred around finding Pat, and specifically the last clothing that he'd been wearing. We knew that he had an iPhone SE, which had never been recovered, and we knew that he was wearing his glasses and a Ben Sherman watch. So it was his personal items or anything connected to Pat at all that we were searching for.
It's now more than a fortnight since Pat McCormick was last seen in Cumber Town Centre. Along with police, up to 23 volunteers examined paths off the Ballydrain Road outside Cumber.
Pat's mobile phone had never been found, but investigations revealed it disconnected from the network shortly after he disappeared. Heather hoped if the team could locate it, it could lead them to Pat.
The searches continued, and then information came in that the vehicles were seen driving out a particular road, and the phone that was being used had suffered a catastrophic failure, which would sort of indicate that it had been put into water. We believe that the phone suffered a catastrophic failure out the Ballydrain Road, heading out from Cumber, out towards Castle Lesby. So the first part of tidal water crossed that road. That was where we had the search.
They told us they were out looking for him with sniffer dogs, and there's police doing their searches and everything. And I just remember, the rest of it was a blur.
We were searching for the phone initially over 2 days in the mud. We didn't actually find anything.
It was a blow to the investigation, but results from the forensics lab provided a major step forward. The brown substance recovered from the stairs was Pat McCormick's blood.
There was 7 swabs which contained the blood of Pat McCormick, mostly around the stairwell area, on the walls and some of the door architrave into the apartment. There was also, I think, 3 swabs which were attributable to blood from David Gill.
With the forensic evidence that we uncovered, we were able to place both Pat McCormick and David Gill in the communal stairway of those apartments.
It was a really positive step forward, and it fitted with our hypothesis that we believed Pat had been lured to that location. David Gill had been lying there in wait for 45 minutes and had then murdered him. And during that, both had spilled blood to a degree, which we had then located and forensically examined at the scene. It doesn't necessarily prove a murder has happened, and, ultimately, we needed either some kind of direct witness evidence, and, the best evidence, of course, would be if we could find Pat, and then we would have the post-mortem and the examination to determine what had caused his death.
Heather and Jennifer needed to discover where David Gill had gone after cleaning up the flat and leaving Cumber.
He remains at home for the next sort of 3 hours or so, at which point on CCTV we see he returns to Cumber. He drives out to the Macra Scouse Road between Cumber and Ballygowan, and it was unclear what he was doing.
We had viewed a lot of CCTV on the different routes that he would have taken before, and his vehicle wasn't picked up on those routes. And then his vehicle isn't sighted again on CCTV for approximately 3 hours.
What we could see from all of the CCTV, which was being gathered from so many different locations, that throughout the day he changed his outfit 3 times.
It does make you wonder why, if he wore the same clothes all day the previous day, that this was a change in his behaviour and that there must be a reason for it.
He returned home via a shop in Lisbon, and on that CCTV footage you could actually see that from his knees down, the trousers that he was wearing were visibly wet and muddy. He went into the shop and he bought himself a pizza and he bought a bottle of bleach, which was highly significant to the theory that we were working on in terms of the body deposition.
David Gill's appearance suggested he was in a wet, muddy environment that afternoon. This was valuable information that Heather and Jennifer could use to narrow the search area.
All of the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together, and we were getting to see what David Gill did throughout the Friday and how he got rid of the body and how he was trying to then get rid of any evidence or connection to himself.
Despite analysing hours of CCTV from over 80 different sites, the team still couldn't fully account for David Gill's movements. They turned to the public for help.
As part of the investigation, we did 19 media releases in the first 6 weeks.
If you're out in the Cumber area and you come across discarded clothing, please get in contact with detectives at Musgrave Street.
The public appeals paid off.
Information came in that there was two large bodies of water in this Ballygowan area, somewhere quite remote.
The caller claimed David Gill had a connection to a property beside one of these bodies of water.
Obviously, areas where there are bodies of water are potentially more preferable for someone to dispose of a body because you have that physical cover, and also it's slightly more difficult to maybe recover or for a member of the public to disturb it or to find anything.
It seemed to provide an ideal place to conceal a body.
It was an area that he was familiar with and probably would have been comfortable to go to do something like to dispose of the body. It also was just set back slightly from the road and had quite good vegetation and cover around it. We decided that that lake was so significant that we wanted police divers to search it.
Once we get the call, we get the plan, we'll obviously look at photography and mapping of the areas, see the size of it, and then come up with an estimate of how long that will take. But given the size of it, and the fact there was two bodies of water, we brought in additional rafting and some other little bits of sonar equipment, because some of it on the far side was actually fairly deep. When you're diving in a quarry, you have quite sheer sides on it. So it means that the sunlight only penetrates down maybe a metre or two. So very quickly you get into complete darkness. Depending on how long the quarry has been flooded, there's years of vegetation that has been decomposing on the bottom. So it could be 2 or 3 feet of silt. So once the diver actually touches bottom, that will all lift up and be suspended in the water. It will stay there because there's nothing to take it away. It's just basically clouds of darkness. So quite often it's easier just to shut your eyes and just go by touch. But when you're searching for a body, you don't know what you're going to be touching next. Finding a body in water can be difficult. It is not an exact science. We can never say exactly what the body will do once it goes subsurface. The body then will slowly start to decompose. The warmer the water, the faster people will start to decompose.
But the team weren't just looking for a body. The media appeals had delivered another significant lead.
A member of the public came forward and said, I heard your appeal and I was just thinking that it may or may not be relevant, but my bin went missing around the time of Pat's murder. It was highly relevant that someone who lived to the rear of the flats was reporting that in around the time they'd actually purchased a new bin and then it had gone missing. It can be difficult to move a body, and experience and professional judgment will tell you that, suitcases and, wheelie bins, just a normal household black bin, potentially could have been used in that action.
The first search area was a larger quarry with a slightly adjoining smaller quarry. Given the size of it, we thought we would start that large quarry first. We searched the shallow bits and then the sides, then moved out onto the actual bed of the quarry. It started to tail away quite deeply, so it took a good day to clear those initial areas. And the second day then we decided that we would use the raft to go out and check the smaller areas. As we were paddling out, we saw a rope just below the surface. We tried to pull up the rope, but it was too heavy. Got a little bit more difficult because there were some trees that had fallen down into it. But the diver was able to overcome them, and then you could see the wheelie bin that was caught up in the branches. We have permanent communications with the diver. He was describing the wheelie bin as being new. There was no rust or anything on the wheels. It was still bright and shiny. The rope was wrapped around the top of it. That was floating up towards the surface. And he described the wheelie bin as having a ratchet strap right around it, securing the lid into it. We thought, this is so unusual, this has to be connected to the case. And we were able to get a rope to that, and team on the surface then hauled it up onto the bank. We stood it upright. It was quite heavy. At that point then, I took my team off to one side. We want to get a specialist in.
I received a phone call that they'd found a black wheelie bin which contained the body of Pat McCormick. There was almost a sense of relief. We had found him, and that was going to be so valuable in terms of the forensic case and being able to then charge Leslie Ann Dodds and David Gill with murder. But it also meant that the family were going to get him home, and we're going to be able to give him the family burial and to say their goodbyes.
They told us they'd found a body in the bottom of a lake. It was confirmed it was my dad because they had to check dental records, and they checked he had tattoos on his arms and his chest. I didn't want to believe it was my dad at all. I just remember feeling very empty and drained, and I just felt as if a part of me was taken away. I was so close to him, so it felt like a part of me was ripped out of me. I remember just feeling awful.
The post-mortem report had proven that Pat had died from a very severe and prolonged beating. He had suffered 24 fractures to his ribs and a broken nose. The cause of death was as a result of those fractures to his ribs, which would have inhibited his ability to breathe and essentially caused his death. There's quite a significant difference in frame and stature between David Gill and Pat McCormick. Pat was actually known by some close friends as tiny. I think he weighed less than 10 stone and was 5 foot 4 inches tall, compared with David Gill, who was over 6 foot and weighed over 23 stone. So there's quite a significant weight and size difference.
David Gill was massive. He is a huge man. And I had seen the images of Pat, so I was aware at the outset that the difference in stature couldn't be more glaring. There was no match physically between the two of them.
Detectives could now rearrest Dodds and Gill, and this time charge them with murder.
They were both interviewed by my team throughout the day on the 11th of July. We took a phased approach to it. This was really to allow us to introduce all of the evidence that we now held, all of the CCTV and witness inquiries and forensics that had come back, and critically, the fact that we'd found Pat. And to ask him to account. You were there. You were with him for a 45-minute window, after which no one's seen him. We had a really strong case at that point. David Gill was prepared to talk to us and continued with his story that it was not him. He had been drunk that night and didn't remember and wasn't involved. You know, it was deniability, and he just was not moving from that point.
Leslie Ann Dodds took a similar approach.
At no point did Leslie Ann show any remorse or any guilt around what she'd done. She was not admitting to any involvement in the murder of Pat McCormick. The case that we were making wasn't that she had been involved in the physical murder or indeed even the removal and disposal of Pat McCormick's body, but she was instrumental behind the planning and the orchestration of what happened on that murderous night. I think it was 10 o'clock in the evening, I charged David Gill with murder, and shortly after midnight, Leslie Ann Dodds was charged with murder. The charge is read out to them. It's quite a formal process, and the reply is noted. I remember David Gill was staring at me while I read it to him, and he said, "Totally innocent, not guilty." And when the charge of murder was put to Leslie Ann Dodds, she simply replied no.
But detectives still had a problem. They had no way to place David Gill at the quarry where Pat's body was found, and neither suspect was given anything away. So Heather turned again to Paul Hope's cell site analysis. He now examined the day after the murder.
Gill's phone starts off at the home address and at about 7 a.m. goes over to the flat at Comber and then travels to and from again on a couple of occasions on that day. He's there on the last occasion from around 12:30 to around 13:30 on the Friday. And then his phone is turned off, or his phone detaches from the network, and it doesn't come on again until 16:20.
It seemed David Gill had likely turned his phone off in a bid to hide his location, but he'd made a fatal error.
This first map is a map of the location of the mast and the direction in which the cell is providing coverage for the specific cell ID that was used by Gill's phone at 16:20 when he turns his phone back on. That clearly is giving coverage in the direction of the quarry.
Heather and Jennifer were confident they had a strong case. They could prove Pat went to Comber to meet Leslie Ann Dodds at her flat. Instead, he found only David Gill. There was a violent struggle. Gill later left the property alone, leaving Pat dead or dying. Throughout, Leslie Ann stayed at David Gill's house from where she was in contact with Pat. Gill returned the next morning and removed Pat's body in a wheelie bin. Phone records later placed him at the quarry where the body was recovered.
These investigations are very complex and extensive. Lots and lots of hours of work go into them. Our job is to try and get justice for Pat McCormick and to support his family through the process.
I was finding it very hard to process. I was going out drinking with my friends every Saturday. I was trying to get distracted and not think about it. I don't think I've still processed it to this day. Just a part of us taken away. And we just didn't really know what to do with it.
The trial process is a very difficult process for any family member who've lost a loved one in these horrific circumstances to sit through. You know, there's post-mortem reports, there's evidence from the likes of police divers, there's CCTV that could be very upsetting. The trial was due to proceed. All of a sudden, David Gill's barrister asked the judge if his client could be rearranged. Nobody expected this. The clerk of the court asked David Gill to stand. He stood, and when the charge of murdering Pat McCormick was put to him again, on this occasion, on this Friday morning, he pleaded guilty. That doesn't happen very often.
The court, it was really weird and it wasn't nice. We got there, the jury was all sworn in, and then all of a sudden, he was pleading guilty to murder.
It did not surprise me because I knew the strength of the case. I knew the weight of the forensic evidence, the CCTV particularly, all of the phone data and the witness. You know, it all pointed towards the fact that he had killed Pat McCormick that night and then had gotten rid of him the next day.
The trial of Leslie Ann Dodds resumed 5 months later in Belfast.
She was still maintaining that she was not guilty of murder, and on the day that her trial was due to start, a new charge of manslaughter was added to the books by the prosecution. That's an alternative to the murder charge, so she pleaded guilty to that.
She was aware that David Gill was going to be at the apartment and that Pat McCormick was going there, and she was aware that there was going to be some sort of physical altercation. The basis of her plea was that she didn't believe or didn't realise that there was going to be really serious harm. She just was aware that there was going to be substantial harm, and that was the difference.
We were all happy, my brothers and sisters, they were happy that they were pleading guilty because it means it wasn't going to be a 6-week court case. Because we didn't really want it to be dragged out because They always drag the victim's name through the mud, and my dad wasn't there to defend himself for anything.
David Gill got 16 years, a minimum life term of 16 years, which is average for this kind of crime. Leslie Ann Dodds got 5.5 years, which was half in custody and half on licence, which is quite a typical sentence for a charge of manslaughter.
On the 22nd of June 2023 at Belfast Crown Court, 4 years after Pat's murder, his family finally secured the justice they'd been searching for. David Gill and Leslie Ann Dodds were now both behind bars.
I remember when they did get sentenced, I was really happy in the moment with the sentencing, but I wish I thought she was going to get more years. It wouldn't have happened without her. Like, David wouldn't have ever met my dad, would have knew nothing about him if it wasn't for her.
We've been stripped of our father. My dad will never get to see any of us grow up or get married. He'll never get to hold his future grandkids, and we leave here today with only memories of our dad, who has been taken from us.
Whenever you see the timeline and you put things together, you can just see it unraveling, and that great sense of Pat almost knew it wasn't right. He had made his mind up, and then he went back and just resulted in such sad and tragic consequences for him.
Leslie Ann Dodds wasn't involved in the physical act of killing Pat McCormick, but without her involvement, it could not have happened, because it was that phone call that lured him back. And I think that's one of the coldest parts of this case, was that it could have turned out so differently if Pat had gone with his instinct or gone with the advice or the information police had given him and never returned. You know, it could have been a completely different ending for Pat.
I knew who it was straight away. It was Leslie Ann and it was David. But I more was pointing fingers at her because I knew that she was the one that done it, if you know what I mean. Like, she would have been the one controlling everything. I was just wanting to know why he actually did it. Like, himself, because he didn't know my dad, he didn't know anything about my dad, and she clearly knew nothing about my dad either. It all just felt like he was a pawn in their game. I just miss being able to see him, because I would have seen him every single day. I miss the relationship and the bond, because I would have turned to my dad for anything and I would have told him anything. I will talk to him. I'll tell him about my dad and how he's always in the back of my mind and everything. But I would go and sit by the grave. I don't go as much now, just because it is upsetting. But it is nice going and sitting by the grave, knowing that, like, he's in there. Like, his soul's gone, but he's still in there.